Hi everyone, welcome back to Learn English Through Stories. In today's video, we're learning English through a fun and simple story. Stories are a great way to improve your vocabulary, practice listening, and understand how English is used in real life. So, grab a seat, relax, and let's dive into today's story together. The Meeting. In a small, peaceful town by the sea, there were two families known by everyone. The Andrews family was rich and well-respected, their large house at the edge of town, standing tall and proud. The Martins, on the other hand, were a humble family. They lived in a small cottage near the forest, and their lives were filled with hard work and simple pleasures. Despite living in the same town for years, the two families had never really interacted until one sunny day when their worlds collided. Emily Andrews was the only daughter of the wealthy Andrews family. She had always been surrounded by luxury, never needing to worry about money or work. She had been to the best schools and had a future that seemed planned out for her. Marry someone from a similar background, live in a large house, and continue the family legacy. But Emily did not care about wealth or status. She wanted something more, something real. Tom Martin, on the other hand, was the youngest son of the Martins. He worked as a carpenter, building houses and repairing furniture for the people in town. His family had always struggled to make ends meet, but they were content. Tom had a quiet confidence, and although he did not have money or high status, he had something far more valuable, a kind heart and a deep sense of honor. One day, Emily took a walk through the town's marketplace. She often enjoyed these walks because they gave her a chance to escape the rigid world of high society. As she strolled along, she saw Tom working on a bench at his stand. He was carefully sanding the wood, his strong hands moving with skill and precision. Emily had seen him around before, but today something about him caught her attention. Tom looked up, and their eyes met. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Emily felt a sudden warmth in her chest. It was as if they had shared a secret, even though they had never spoken before. Tom smiled at her, a little shy, and she smiled back. There was no need for words. Their silent connection was enough. But the world they lived in was not so simple. Emily quickly turned her gaze away, remembering her place in the world. She was the daughter of a wealthy family, and people like Tom were not meant for her. He was a carpenter, not someone she should even be talking to. As she continued to walk, Emily could not shake the feeling that something had changed inside her. There was a stirring in her heart, a curiosity that she had never felt before. She had always been taught that her life should follow a certain path, one that was mapped out by her family's expectations. But now she found herself questioning those expectations. Tom, too, could not forget the moment when their eyes met. He had seen many beautiful women in his life, but there was something about Emily that made him think differently. She was not like the others. There was a kindness in her eyes, a gentleness in her smile. He knew that people like her didn't usually talk to people like him, but he couldn't help the way he felt. That evening, as Tom returned home to his modest cottage, he told his sister Sarah about the encounter. He was confused and unsure about what it meant. "I saw her today, Sarah, Emily Andrews. I don't know why, but she looked at me like she saw something in me," he said. Sarah, who was older and wiser, gave him a knowing look. "Tom, You're a good man, but remember, she's from a different world. Her family would never approve of someone like you. It's not your fault, but that's the way it is." Tom sighed. "I know, but I can't help how I feel. I think she might be different. I can't stop thinking about her." Meanwhile, Emily sat by her window that night, staring out at the moonlit sky. She, too, couldn't stop thinking about Tom. The encounter had stirred something deep inside her, something that made her feel both excited and scared. She was not supposed to fall for someone like him. She was expected to marry a man of her own social class, someone who would help her continue the family's legacy. But as she thought about Tom, the thought of a life without him seemed unbearable. The next day, Emily couldn't resist going back to the marketplace. She told herself it was just another walk, but deep down, she hoped to see Tom again. When she arrived, she found him working on another piece of furniture. This time, she walked slowly past his stand, hoping for another glance, a sign that their connection was not just a fleeting moment. Tom noticed her immediately, his heart skipping a beat. He stood up from his work and greeted her with a smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Andrews," he said, his voice steady, but his hands shaking slightly. Emily hesitated for a moment, then smiled back. "Good afternoon, Mr. Martin," she replied, using his last name out of politeness, but her voice held warmth. For a moment, neither of them knew what to say. They were both aware of the social divide between them, but neither wanted to acknowledge it. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "Your work is very beautiful," she said, looking at the wooden pieces on his stand. Tom looked surprised. "Thank you, Miss Andrews. I take a lot of pride in it." They continued to talk for a few more minutes, discussing the weather and the market. The conversation was simple, but both of them felt a growing connection. Neither of them had ever felt so at ease with someone from the opposite side of the social divide. As Emily walked away, she felt a flutter in her chest. It was as though a door had opened, a door she had never known existed before. But at the same time, she felt a deep sense of fear. She knew that her family would never approve of a relationship with someone like Tom. And Tom, too, felt the weight of their differences. But for now, all that mattered was the connection they had shared in that brief, magical moment. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a love story that would challenge everything they knew about family, society, and the power of love itself. The growing connection. Days passed, but Emily couldn't forget Tom. Despite her best efforts to push the thoughts of him away, she found herself thinking about him constantly. She had never felt such a pull toward someone before, and it both excited and terrified her. Tom was different from the men she knew. He didn't care about wealth or status. He was genuine, hard-working, and kind. These qualities made her feel alive in a way that was both thrilling and dangerous. Back in the marketplace, Tom, too, couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Every time he saw her walking by, his heart would race. But he knew that getting involved with someone like her was not just risky, it was impossible. Her family would never accept a relationship between them. He had heard the stories, the whispers around town about the Andrews family's strict values and expectations. They would never approve of a carpenter marrying their daughter, no matter how kind he was or how deeply he cared for her. But one afternoon, fate had other plans. Emily found herself walking toward Tom's stand again, unable to stay away. This time, there was no hesitation in her steps. She walked straight up to him, her heart beating in her chest, her palms slightly sweaty. She smiled when she saw him, and this time there was no formal greeting. It felt natural, like they had been friends for years, despite the reality of their situation. "Hello again, Mr. Martin," Emily said, her voice soft yet steady. "Hello, Miss Andrews," Tom replied, his smile warm and genuine. "What brings you by today?" "I've been admiring your work," Emily said, looking at the wooden pieces on display. "It's really beautiful. Do you make all of this yourself?" Tom felt a surge of pride. "Yes, I do. Every piece is handmade. It takes time, but it's worth it." "I can see that," she replied, her eyes sparkling. "I've always admired craftsmanship. It's so different from the things I'm used to." Tom couldn't help but smile at her words. "I think the beauty is in the details. It's not about how much something costs. It's about the effort and love that goes into it." Emily nodded, her thoughts drifting. It was the kind of sentiment she had never heard from anyone in her world. She was used to hearing about appearances, money, and status. But Tom spoke about things that mattered, things she longed for in her own life. As the conversation continued, they spoke more freely, as if there were no invisible barriers between them. They talked about their lives, their dreams, and even the things they didn't have in common. Emily learned that Tom had always dreamed of opening his own workshop, where he could create larger pieces of furniture and train others. Tom learned that Emily wasn't as interested in the high society life she had been born into as people might think. She wanted to travel, to experience the world beyond the walls of her family's estate. For a brief moment, Emily allowed herself to imagine a different life, a life where she could walk alongside Tom in the world outside her family's control. She imagined waking up early in a little house, working together with him to create beautiful things. It was a life so different from the one she had been raised to live, yet it felt like the life she had always dreamed of. But reality was never far away. As Emily stood there talking to Tom, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her family's expectations. She knew that if they found out she was speaking to someone like Tom, they would never allow it. The divide between them, rich and poor, high society and the working class, was more than just a social gap. It was an unspoken rule that everyone in town followed. People like her did not marry people like him, and yet she couldn't stop herself from being drawn to him. Tom, too, felt the tension. Every time he looked at Emily, he could see the conflict in her eyes. He knew that she was fighting against something, fighting against the life that had been planned for her, a life that left no room for someone like him. But he could also see that she was different from other women in her world. She was kind, curious, and free-spirited, and he found himself wanting to protect her from the constraints of her family and society. The two of them stood there for what felt like an eternity, talking about everything and nothing, before Emily realized how late it had become. "I should be going," she said reluctantly, glancing at the clock on the wall of the market. "My father will be looking for me." Tom nodded, though a part of him wished she could stay longer. "Of course. It was good talking to you, Miss Andrews." "Please, call me Emily," she said with a smile. "Emily," he repeated, savoring the sound of her name. "Take care." As she walked away, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. She knew it wasn't just a simple conversation. It was the beginning of something far more complicated, something that neither of them was ready to face. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase the smile that had formed on her lips, the warmth that had spread through her chest. Later that evening, at the Andrews family estate, Emily's father, Mr. Andrews, sat in his study, reviewing some business documents. His mind was focused on work, but he couldn't ignore the growing unease in his heart. He had always been protective of his daughter, and he knew that Emily was at a difficult age. He had arranged for her to marry a wealthy, well-connected man, someone who would secure the future of the Andrews family. It was a match made for power and influence. But as Mr. Andrews sat at his desk, his thoughts drifted to the events of the day. He had heard rumors of Emily's walks in the marketplace, of her speaking to the common people. He knew that if she continued to act this way, things could become complicated. And as he thought of her walking with someone like Tom Martin, a man from a humble family, he felt a tightness in his chest. He couldn't allow this to happen. Emily had to be careful. Little did he know, Emily's heart was already beginning to pull her in a direction he would never approve of. Secrets and tensions. As the days passed, Emily found herself drawn more and more to Tom. The chance encounters in the marketplace became more frequent, and each time they met, it was as if the world around them disappeared. Their conversations, though often simple, were filled with an unspoken understanding that made them both feel alive. Emily began to look forward to her walks, knowing that she would see Tom again. But as the connection between them grew, so did the tension. Emily felt the weight of her family's expectations more than ever. She knew that her father had already arranged for her to marry someone from a wealthy family, someone who would protect her place in society. Emily had been taught from a young age that her duty was to her family, to continue the legacy of the Andrews name, to marry for status and security. But Tom was different. He didn't care about money, and he didn't expect anything from her except honesty and kindness. He saw her as a person, not just the daughter of a wealthy family. One evening, Emily sat at her vanity, brushing her long, dark hair. She gazed into the mirror, her thoughts a whirl of confusion. She had always believed that her life would follow a certain path, that she would marry a man who fit the expectations of her family. But now, every time she thought of Tom, a sense of longing filled her heart. She had never felt this way before, this pull, this desire to break free from the life she knew. Her mind wandered to the first time they had met in the marketplace, when their eyes had locked and everything seemed to pause for a moment. She had never experienced anything like that before. Tom had made her feel something real, something deep and pure, but she also knew that he was not a part of her world. Her father would never accept someone like him, and her mother would be furious if she ever found out Emily had been speaking to him. Emily let out a sigh, her fingers gently caressing the delicate lace of her dress. She wanted to see Tom again, but at the same time, she feared the consequences. If her family ever found out, it could ruin everything. They would disown her, and her life would be shattered. Meanwhile, Tom was also struggling with his feelings. Every time he saw Emily, he felt a sense of joy, but it was always accompanied by a feeling of dread. He knew that a relationship with her would never be accepted by her family, and he could never expect her to go against her own future for him. Yet, he couldn't help the way he felt. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, smart, kind and beautiful, and he couldn't imagine a life without her. But Tom knew that the world they lived in was unforgiving. If anyone found out about their connection, it could destroy both of their lives. One day, as Emily walked through the marketplace again, she saw Tom working on a new piece of furniture. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. The tension between them was undeniable, and yet she felt an overwhelming urge to see him again. She walked toward him, her heart beating faster with each step. When Tom saw her, his face lit up with a smile. "Emily," he said, his voice soft and warm, "I wasn't expecting to see you today." "I couldn't stay away," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "I wanted to see how your work was coming along." Tom smiled, his heart skipping a beat. "It's going well. I've been working on this table for a client. It's going to be something special." "I'm sure it will be," Emily said, her voice filled with admiration. "You have such a talent for this." They spoke for a while, casually discussing the work Tom was doing and the weather, but both of them knew that the conversation was just an excuse to be near each other. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, and the more they talked, the harder it became to ignore the feelings growing inside them. As Emily stood there, a voice interrupted their conversation. It was a voice she recognized instantly. "Emily, there you are. We've been looking for you everywhere." It was her father, Mr. Andrews, and he was not alone. He was accompanied by a tall, well-dressed man, one Emily had seen before. His name was Charles Bellamy, a man her father had been trying to arrange a marriage with for months. Emily's stomach twisted at the sight of him. She had no interest in Charles, but her father had made it clear that this was the man he expected her to marry. "Father," Emily said, trying to hide the unease in her voice, "what are you doing here?" "We've been searching for you, my dear," Mr. Andrews said, his voice stern. "Charles has been kind enough to accompany me today. We were hoping to speak with you about the arrangements for the wedding." Emily's heart sank. She felt trapped. She looked at Tom, who stood silently by her side, his eyes filled with concern. She could see the tension in his face, the realization that this was the moment when everything could change. Charles, noticing the awkwardness, extended his hand to Tom. "Good afternoon, sir," he said, his tone polite but distant. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Charles Bellamy." Tom shook his hand, forcing a smile. "Tom Martin," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm just a carpenter." Mr. Andrews' eyes narrowed at the exchange. "A carpenter, you say? I see," he said, his voice cold. "Well, Emily, I think we should be going now. We have much to discuss." Emily felt a wave of anger and helplessness wash over her. Her father was already judging Tom, and she knew that this meeting would only deepen the divide between them. But she also knew that her father would not let her leave easily. "Father, I need to speak with you," she said, her voice firm. "Alone." Mr. Andrews raised an eyebrow but nodded, signaling to Charles to wait for a moment. Emily quickly pulled her father aside, away from Tom. "Father, you can't do this," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't want to marry Charles. I don't care about his money or his status. I care about something real." Her father's face hardened. "Enough, Emily," he said sharply. "This is for your future. You don't understand the importance of these arrangements. Charles is a good match for you. He is from a respected family, and he can offer you everything you could possibly want." "But that's not what I want," Emily whispered. "I want something more than just security and status. I want love. I want someone who sees me, not just my family's name." Her father's eyes narrowed. "You will marry Charles, Emily. You don't have a choice in the matter." The words stung, but Emily knew she had to fight for what she believed in. She could feel Tom's eyes on her, watching from a distance. And in that moment, she realized that her heart was already leading her down a path she couldn't turn back from. The defiance. The next few days were filled with tension. Emily felt trapped in her own life, suffocated by her family's expectations and the looming reality of an arranged marriage to Charles Bellamy. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "You don't have a choice in the matter." But Emily was beginning to realize that she did have a choice. She could choose to follow the path that was laid out for her, or she could defy it and pursue a life that felt true to her heart. She spent her days avoiding Charles, who continued to show up at her family's estate with his charm and well-meaning attentions. But to Emily, he was nothing more than a symbol of everything she didn't want. She no longer enjoyed his visits, and the mere thought of marrying him made her stomach turn. She had always known that duty would play a big role in her life, but now she saw it as a prison. The only place Emily felt free was in the marketplace, where she could lose herself in the simplicity of the world around her. She would often go there after her lessons or before dinner, wandering past the stalls and watching the busy lives of the town's people unfold. And, of course, she always found herself returning to Tom. Tom had been working on a new project, a large wooden chest for a customer, but his mind was often elsewhere. Since the encounter with Emily and her father, he had found it difficult to focus. He could see the change in Emily's eyes, the way she seemed lost in thought whenever they spoke. He knew she was struggling with something, but he wasn't sure what it was. All he knew was that every time they spoke, he felt more and more connected to her. He wanted to tell her how he felt, but the fear of what it would mean, what it could cost them both, held him back. One afternoon, as Emily walked through the market, she found herself, once again, drawn to Tom's stand. This time she didn't hesitate. She walked right up to him, her heart racing as she stood before him. She looked into his eyes, and for a moment it felt like the world was fading away. "Tom," she said, her voice low but steady, "I need to talk to you." Tom looked up at her, startled by the urgency in her voice. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Emily glanced around, making sure no one was watching them too closely. The last thing she wanted was for her father or Charles to see her speaking to Tom in such a personal way. "I can't marry him," she said, her words coming out in a rush. "I can't marry Charles. I don't want that life. I want something real, something that matters." Tom's heart skipped a beat, but he remained calm. "Emily, you know I want the best for you, but this is dangerous. Your family, your father, won't let you go through with it. It's not just about you, it's about everything that comes with it. You can't escape that reality." "I know," Emily said, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. "But I don't care. I don't want to be a part of a life that's already decided for me. I want to choose my own path, even if it means defying everything I've been taught." Tom stepped closer to her, his voice soft but full of concern. "But what will happen if you defy them, Emily? What will they do? Your father, he won't just be angry, he'll disown you. It could ruin everything for you." "I know," she whispered, her eyes meeting his, "but I can't live a life that isn't mine. I've spent so long trying to be what everyone else wants me to be. I've ignored who I really am. But when I'm with you, I feel free. I feel like myself." Tom's chest tightened at her words, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. The truth was, he felt the same way. When he was with Emily, it was as though nothing else mattered. No social divides, no expectations, no rules. But he also knew that it was impossible for them to be together in the way they both wanted. The world would never accept their love. "Emily, I care about you," he said, his voice low and earnest. "But I don't want to see you hurt. I don't want to see your life ruined because of me." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she blinked them away. "I don't care about my life being ruined," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I care about living it, and I want to live it with you, Tom. I want to be with you, no matter the cost." Tom looked at her for a long moment, his heart torn between his love for her and the harsh reality that stood in their way. He wanted to take her hand and run away with her, to leave behind the restrictions of society and build a life together. But he knew that even if they ran, they couldn't escape the judgment of the world. "Emily, I don't know what to say," he confessed, his voice filled with frustration. "But I don't want to be the one who ruined your life. I don't want to take away the future that's been promised to you." Emily's heart ached at his words, but she knew what she wanted. "Tom, I'm asking you to take a chance with me," she said softly. "I can't promise it will be easy, but if we don't try, we'll never know what could be." For a long time, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, feeling the weight of their shared emotions. In that moment, Emily knew that she was willing to risk everything for a chance at love. She would rather fight for something real than spend her life living a lie. But just as they were about to speak again, a voice broke the silence. "Hey, Emily!" It was her father, and he was not alone. This time, he was accompanied by Charles, who had clearly been looking for her. The sight of them both standing there made Emily's heart sink. "Emily, I've been looking for you," her father said, his voice stern. "We need to talk. Now." Emily turned to Tom, her eyes filled with regret. She knew what was coming. Her father's anger would be fierce, and she would have to face the consequences of defying him. But she wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in her life, Emily felt like she was standing up for who she truly was. And no matter what happened, she was ready to face it. A bold decision. The weight of the moment felt unbearable as Emily stood between Tom and her father, Charles standing silently by her father's side. Her heart raced in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. She had never felt so torn, so conflicted. Her father's stern expression only made her resolve harder to maintain. She had always obeyed him, respected his decisions. But now she was ready to defy him. "Emily," her father said sharply, his voice full of authority, "what is this nonsense? Why are you speaking with someone like him?" He gestured toward Tom, his gaze cold. "This is beneath you." Emily's throat tightened as she looked at her father, her mind reeling with words she couldn't quite find. She had spent years following his expectations, playing the role of the obedient daughter. But now she could no longer stand in the shadows of those expectations. "Father," she began, her voice quiet but firm, "I need to speak to you. alone. Her father's face hardened further, but he nodded curtly, signaling to Charles to wait. He motioned for Emily to follow him away from Tom into a quieter part of the marketplace. "Now, Emily," her father said, his voice low with anger, "I've given you everything, a secure future, a respectable family. Why would you throw all of that away for someone who will never be accepted by our society?" Emily swallowed hard, but her voice did not waver. "Because I don't want to live a life that isn't mine, Father. I don't want to marry someone I don't love. I want to marry someone who understands me, who sees me for who I am, not just as the daughter of a wealthy man." Her father's face flushed with fury. "This is foolishness, Emily. Do you really think that man," he pointed back toward Tom, "will give you the life you deserve? You'll live in poverty, struggle every day. You'll ruin everything we worked for." "I don't care about that anymore," Emily whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I care about being happy. I care about having a life of my own making." Her father's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "You will marry Charles Bellamy. That is not negotiable." Emily shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. "No, Father, I won't marry him. Not unless I can choose for myself. I've spent my whole life trying to please you, trying to follow the rules. But I've come to realize that I can't keep living like this. I have to choose my own path, even if it means losing everything." Her father's expression softened for a moment, but only for a brief instant. He looked at her with disappointment, as if she had betrayed him. "This is your choice, then? You're choosing him over your family, over everything I've given you?" Emily's eyes welled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly. "I'm choosing myself, Father, and if that means I lose your approval, then so be it." The silence between them was thick, both of them standing there, each unwilling to back down. Emily's heart was heavy with the weight of her decision. She had never imagined this moment would come, the moment when she would have to choose between love and family, between happiness and duty. But now that it had arrived, she knew deep down that she had made the only choice she could. Her father looked at her one last time, his gaze hardening. "I will not accept this, Emily. If you choose him, you choose to leave this family. I will not have a daughter who disrespects everything we stand for." Her heart broke at his words, but she stood tall. "I'm sorry, Father, but I can't live your life for you. I need to live my own." With those words, Emily turned away, her mind focused on one thing, Tom. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had to find him, to speak with him. As she walked back toward Tom's stand, she saw him standing there waiting for her. His face was a mixture of concern and hope, but when he saw the look on her face, his heart sank. "Emily," he said softly, "what happened?" She shook her head, her voice full of emotion. "I told him, Tom. I told him everything. I told him I couldn't marry Charles. I told him I couldn't live the life he had planned for me." Tom's eyes widened, and he took a step toward her. "And what did he say?" "He was angry. He said if I chose you, I would be disowned. I would lose everything." Emily paused, her voice shaking. "But I don't care, Tom. I would rather lose everything than live a life that's not mine." Tom reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. "Emily, are you sure about this? This isn't going to be easy. Your family will never accept us." "I don't care," she said, her voice firm, though tears shimmered in her eyes. I know it won't be easy, but I can't spend my life pretending to be someone I'm not. I want to be with you, Tom. I want to build a life with you, no matter what it takes." Tom's heart swelled with emotion, but his face was filled with uncertainty. "But Emily, what about your family? What about everything you've known?" "I don't want that life anymore, Tom. I want a life with you, a real life, a life where we can be who we are, not who everyone expects us to be." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to disappear, leaving just the two of them standing in the midst of everything that was about to change. Finally, Tom took a deep breath, his expression softening. "Then we'll make it work. We'll find a way, Emily. Together." And in that moment, everything else seemed to fade away. Emily knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. She had made her choice, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they walked away from the marketplace, hand in hand, ready to face a future that was theirs to shape. Thanks for joining me today on Learn English Through Stories. I hope you enjoyed the story and learned something new. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more English learning content. See you next time, and happy learning.